Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. I'm Stacy. If you're new here, welcome in. If you're coming back, I'm so glad to have you. Let's talk about things that you absolutely will not budge on as a nurse. If you like what you see here, then I ask that you like, subscribe, and follow for more. There are some things as a nurse that I simply will not be moved on. And I think as nurses, we all have this inside of us. For example, you have to know when to say no. You cannot compromise your values or go against what you know to be right and correct. And you will be asked to. And it's important that you stand on your foundation firmly and that you aren't swayed by manipulation. Because sometimes people can make you feel bad for saying no. Now, I've rarely been in those situations, and many years ago, maybe more so than now, because honestly, I think nurse managers and people in leadership know what we're faced with in this day. So it's very rare. Sure, they're disappointed if you say no, and they don't like it, but they're not going to guilt you into doing something that you absolutely will not do. Now, some things that I don't think we get manipulated into, but some people are not knowledgeable in what is correct and something that's been done a certain way for a long time. It's important for you to know regulations and laws as well, because sometimes people will have been doing something for a long time in a situation and it's not correct. And if you know it's not correct, just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean that you should, because if you mess up, you're liable for that. So I think it's really important that you know your hard nose and you know what to do and what not to do as a nurse. Hard nose don't have to just apply to nursing practice, but it can apply to your work schedule. It can apply to the days that you take off. But mostly when I'm talking about my hard nose, I'm talking about things that I won't do as a nurse if I'm asked to do them or expected to do them and I know it's wrong. When I was an LPN, we could, and this is many years ago, in the state that I worked in, LPNs did not have regulations on what we could and could not do that were staunch and strict about IVs. So we would be expected to do things that should really just be an RN responsibility. And I don't mean that negatively against LPNs, LVNs. I know that LVNs and LPNs are nurses. What I'm talking about is scope of practice. I think it's really important as an LPN, LVN, RN, advanced practice nurse, etc., that you know your scope of practice. I'm a registered nurse. It is important that you know your scope of practice. As nurses, we can't diagnose people, etc. We know this. There's a fine line when you're IV certified of what you can and cannot do, and it is really important to know what each state's regulations are regarding your responsibilities as an LPN, LVN versus RN. Again, I will say this again. I am not saying that LPNs and LVNs are not nurses, because we are all nurses. It says nurse in our licensure, right? What I'm saying is I pushed IV Lasix years and years ago, and nothing happened negatively, but it could have. It could have adversely affected the patient in a skilled nursing facility. Was I supervised by an RN? Yes, technically I was. Our DON is considered an RN supervisor over LPNs, and she delegated this task to me. But in a court of law, if something had happened, I'm pretty sure she wouldn't have backed me up on that. So as a LPN or LVN that has an IV certification, it's really important that you know in each state where you're licensed and where you're certified, what your scope of practice is with an IV and what access you are allowed to do. What you can flush, what you can't flush, what you can hang, what you can't hang, and you probably are not going to be doing IV pushes as an LPN. Is that to say that you wouldn't be capable of understanding how to do that and that you couldn't do it safely? No, definitely not. But I will die on this hill. If it's not in your scope of practice, do not do it. Because even if somebody is instructing you to do it and you've seen other people do it, that doesn't mean it's in your scope of practice, and it doesn't mean it's legal. And so as nurses, if I was an LPN or an LVN now, I would never push IV Lasix. I would ask for an RN to do that. I would never do that, even though I had been trained to access IVs, flush them, to hang certain IV medications, especially fluids and premixed antibiotics. LPNs could do that in the state that I was in. What LPNs could not do, and I learned later, and they specified it much clearer As time went on in my career, I was an LPN for 11 years, and the guidelines got really tightened over the years of what an LPN and what an RN could do in the state where I was initially practicing as a nurse. LPNs cannot be pushing IV meds, and there are a lot of things that can happen when you do. So I did read how to do it. I did do it the way that I was taught how to push an IV med. But as time went on, I learned that that was something I shouldn't have done. And it felt icky to me to do it. And now, if I feel questionable about something, I will do my research and I will not do it if it's not in my scope of practice, even if every other nurse in the building is doing it. And that's what I mean by not negotiating on what you will and will not do. If it is in your scope of practice, if you are trained to do it, absolutely, you can do those things. If it's in your scope of practice and you've never done it before, I will die on this hill. You shouldn't do it alone the first time you do it. You need to do it with someone who is going to walk you through that procedure, or ask that someone do it in front of you so that you can see it done first. And the next time you do it, have someone go with you. And then if you're not confident, still have someone again go with you. Because I understand in nursing, we don't always have the ability to ask for help, or we feel like we don't, right? We feel like I can't ask someone to come and do this for me because it's inconvenient for the other staff. But it's going to be more inconvenient for you if you lose your nursing license, or if you are not able to continue to practice for what you've worked so hard to earn. You worked very hard to earn your nursing license, whether that be LPN, LVN, or RN. You worked very hard to earn that license, and you should work very hard to protect it, as hard as everybody else works to protect theirs. If it's not in your scope of practice, don't do it. That's what I mean by that. Also, if you've worked 12 hours and someone asks you to stay over, know the laws on that, on how long you can be mandated. Some places can mandate you to stay and you can't clock out and leave, or you can be disciplined for that. They can report you for abandonment if you leave a facility and there's no one to replace you. That being said, there are laws about how long you can stay in a facility and work and cover a shift. They have to give you so many hours off in between. So know those things when you're asked or mandated to stay. Have I been mandated to stay? Yes. Have I mandated other employees to stay? Yes. Have I had to go in and relieve employees? Yes, I have. Managers also have to come in and work the floor too, or do nursing responsibilities, because nurse managers are still nurses, and it doesn't take away your responsibilities as a nurse if the nurse is not there to cover. This is why management is so tricky, because you have to realize that there are going to be times that you have to cover things, and it may be putting you into a long amount of hours of working. And you got to ask yourself if that's something that you want to do. Those should be hard yes and no things in your mind about what you're willing to do in your career for your license, and if you're able to do that. I will be honest with you, I can't work a 24-hour shift. It's not going to happen. I will not be thinking clearly, and neither will you. I think it's not fair for employers to expect such things. And I know it's been asked, and I've seen people work 16 hours and turn around and come back the next day and work 16 hours again. And that is exhausting. I know when I have worked 12-hour shifts repeatedly, and there have been days I haven't come home until 7:30 or 8 at night, working 8 to 5. If I do that several days in a row, I am tired and I am not thinking clearly. You know, if you work a 40-hour week and now you're putting in 16-hour days, I think that impairs your nursing judgment. So that's a hill I will die on. I will not pick up shifts that are going to make me put my license at risk and my judgment at risk, because really, if you're tired, your driving is at risk. Your driving is at risk. You're not going to drive safely coming home and coming to work, and you're not going to make smart decisions, and you're not going to make good judgment calls if you're too tired. So that's something that's a hard no for me. If I've worked too many hours, or if I'm exhausted, you're not going to get another thing out of me. It's just not going to happen. I can't do it. And also, sometimes as a nurse, you have to choose yourself and your family and the things that you have going on. People that you work for will take what you will give them, and that's a fact. And the more you give, the more they'll take. And if you're giving it willingly, they're never going to feel bad about taking that from you. Yes, they will say thank you. Yes, they will appreciate you. But if you do not feel capable of doing those things, you should not feel obligated to do those things. Is it appreciated coming from the side of when I have been a manager? Yes, it's always appreciated when people pick up extra shifts and I don't have to work extra as a manager. However, there has to be a balance of your home life too. And also, when you're a manager, they can't expect you to never have time off too. I remember when I was working as a manager in a long-term care facility, a supervisory nurse who would come in and supervise on the weekends actually said to me that that's why I made the big bucks. But in comparison to what nurses were making on the floor, and in comparison to how many hours I was working in a day and in a week, I was not making the big bucks. I wasn't even averaging what the CNAs on the floor were making compared to the amount of hours that I was working. So understand that just because a salary looks lucrative doesn't mean that you're making the big bucks. If you're working 60, 70 hours a week, you're not getting a return on that salary at all. So always consider that when you're talking about salary versus hours worked. I have to thank my husband for that. He was really good at pointing that out to me. When I was picking up those hours, I just thought, well, I'm salaried, I have to do it. Okay, but there's a line for salary too. And I will say that I've worked for companies who have a respect for salaried workers. They would make you clock in and clock out, even though you were salaried, to keep track of your hours. And if you worked over, they would comp you. They would comp you your hours. You would get a day off. And they were very good and very fair about it. Some states have really good labor laws and really good ratio for nurses to patients, CNAs to patients. I have worked in states where those ratios are excellent, and I have worked in places where those ratios should be reevaluated, unfortunately. I will say that I think for the most part, I haven't worked for anybody that didn't appreciate the effort that I gave. That being said, we all know that there has been nurses leaving in droves. They just leave without notice, or they put in their notice and they don't work it through. And that's really a strain for the schedule, because when you don't work your notice through, everybody else has to cover for you, and everybody else has obligations in lives too. And I understand we have to think of ourselves when we give a notice, but I will say that that's a hard line for me too. I will always give my notice and work it through, even if it's the most challenging job for me, because I understand that if I am not there doing my job, somebody else has to do it. And I know that when I quit there, that's not my responsibility to think about anymore. But usually when you give your notice, they have made a plan to have you available during those days. And they haven't thought of replacing you during those days because of that. So my hard no's are, I'm not going to quit without notice, because I want to be respectable as a professional and show that I can keep my word and that I am professional in my job. Despite what the government is saying about nurses right now, just got to say that, because nurses are professionals regardless of what the Department of Education wants to say now. Then my other hard no's are, don't do something that's out of your scope of practice, and don't work hours that you cannot emotionally, physically, and mentally handle. That's it. My biggest no's though are having to do with your scope of practice. Know what you should and shouldn't do, and if you aren't sure of the answer, research it. Don't ever just say yes to something that is asked of you. And if you notice that your coworkers are doing something, just because everybody on your unit has done it does not mean that it is safe, correct, or within your scope of practice. So again, always say no if it's something that you know you should not be doing. You should not be doing it, don't do it. That's my hard no. If you should not be doing it, don't do it. That's all I have to say about that. What are your hard no's in your professional life? What are things that you will not compromise on? What are things that are valuable to you in your career? We all worked hard for this license, and it pays for our life, right? Everything that we do in our job can affect our freedom and our professional license. So it's very important that we protect ourselves. Protect yourself. Cover your own behind. That's a good recommendation for anybody. So tell me more about your hard no's, your hard lines. Tell me about some experiences that you've had. I'd love to hear more about it in the comments. Let's talk about it. If you have any suggestions for content or questions that you have, I would love to hear it. And if you like what you see here and you want to see more, then I ask that you like, subscribe, and follow for more. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.